Okay, I'm still talking about finances because finances is really important and it all ties together. Remember, we looked at last time, we said we can prove that barter and capitalism are natural systems. They will come about as long as you have private property and rule of law. So you have to have government, basically government to provide that law and the protection of private property, which we also proved is the only purpose that's provable of government. Now, there are some really important things in capitalism that are very easy to prove and that are necessary to understand. Because as we know, and by the way, this is something to contemplate. I don't know if I'll have time to really talk about it much, but in fascistic systems, which by the way we have, the government controls your business and controls you through regulation. In a socialist system, the government controls or owns the business. In communism, the government owns everything, including all the private property. So in those systems, capitalism still exists to a degree because it's natural. So what is the natural part of capitalism other than just currency value and other things? And by the way, I also put in, I repeated, this is from our Constitution, the basic authority of our federal government. And the reason I put that authority of the federal government again in there, we may touch on some of these concepts again, is because of where rights come from. Do the rights come to you because of the Constitution? No. As a matter of fact, the Constitution restricts who? The government. The purpose of the Constitution, it does enumerate, matter of fact, the amendments enumerate your rights. They enumerate your rights that are pre-existing according to both the Declaration and the Constitution. Your rights come from God in natural law. So by the way, natural law should be something we study, right? Natural law is mentioned specifically in the Constitution and the Declaration. Now, the important thing to note is that the Constitution does not restrict any human rights. It restricts the government. So anyway, that's one of the reasons I listed. Now, what about capitalism? Capitalism is very simple. I got it right there. You can't regulate a market. You can't regulate a market. You can perturb a market. You cannot regulate it. What do I mean by that? When we talk about regulating a market, there's talk even today about preventing price gouging. So therefore, we will set a value for goods, or that we will, for example, ration. Right now, we're rationing water. Rationing water is where you say you set the availability of goods. Now, what happens? We can prove this, by the way, and if we have time, we may go and do that, because you can prove it in three ways. You can prove it using logic, basic reasoning, and if that's not obvious, you can also prove it using the scientific method, and they have. These concepts have been proven over and over again using the scientific method. You can also prove them historically by looking back at historical records, which, by the way, is the means of proving this specific idea in the scientific method. You look back at data. So number one, a market is based on two things: price and availability of a commodity. So it's really easy to just think in terms of the commodity or the price of a commodity. And basically, we've already proven that price is basically the cost in the labor of the commodity, or the value, the apparent value of the commodity. But the availability of a commodity is the amount that is available to buy or sell. All markets work like this. So you have price and you have availability. Price and availability. And they are in direct relation to one another. So in a free market, when the availability of the commodity goes down, so if it's harder to buy pet rocks, the value of the pet rock goes up. if people want pet rocks. But people finally didn't want pet rocks anymore. Cabbage Patch dolls. What happens when the availability goes down? How about the latest one? PS5s. Nobody got caught in the PS5 debacle where everybody wanted PS5s, the PlayStation 5, and they weren't available. And so people were paying twice the price for a PS5, $2,000 for a PS5. The real price is like $500 or something like that. Anyway, so when availability goes down, the price must go up. Why? Because there's not enough stock, and so the price goes up. That's just natural. If you're running out of gas, if you have no gas, but people want gas, gas is dear, they're going to sell at a higher price. That's the way it goes. On the other hand, when the availability of the commodity goes up, the price goes down. Anybody who's been on eBay knows this, right? On eBay, if there is something that or the thrift shop, go to a thrift shop. What do they got in a thrift shop? You can't miss it. Lots of used clothing. They're selling the used clothing for $5 a jacket. How much does a jacket cost new at J.C. Crew? J. Crew, right? You're going to pay it $200. And on sale, you might get half that, right? But if you go to the thrift shop, you pay $5. Why is that? They got lots of used goods, and people are trying to get rid of them. This is just a market. These are markets. You can't, and by the way, you can't run out of a commodity in a free market. If the availability of the commodity goes down, the price goes up. People try to discover ways to get more of the commodity. This is the second rule of markets. The first rule of markets is price and availability. Price and availability is the first rule of markets. The second rule of markets is called the rule of innovation. The rule of innovation says that when the availability goes down, what do businesses do like crazy when availability goes down? When price goes up, what do? They want a piece of that market, right? So, for example, a great example is oil, heavy hydrocarbons, fossil fuels. We will never run out of fossil fuels. Anybody knows how many years of fossil fuels we have right now? Known reserve? 300 years. It goes up every year. Why does it go up every year? Because it used to be you could go to Texas and dig 10 feet and you hit a well. Well, that kind of gave out in the 20s. They had to go deeper. But what do? They figure ways to drill deeper, right? They're still making a mint. And by the way, the price went down. The price of gasoline was the equivalent of $10 a gallon, $20 a gallon back at the beginning of the automobile era. Today, if you look at the price compared to inflation, we talked about this, right? Fiat currencies, etc. The government is illegally setting the value of the dollar based on the amount of dollars they print, which is the Federal Reserve, which is illegal according to the Constitution, but they do it. So inflation keeps going up, the value of the commodity stays the same, or actually goes down. It'll go down because of this innovation. Because with heavy hydrocarbons, what are we talking about today? Fracking, right? There are even other methods. There are bazillions of gallons of oil in Canada. They're hard to get. Anybody know why? They're called sand oil. Yeah, they're in the sands, and you have to separate it from the sands. But some bright guy, like Elon Musk of the future, is going to figure out how to get it, and guess what? It's going to be cheaper. The commodity value always goes down with time because of innovation. Anybody paying $500 for an AM radio you put in your pocket? Anybody want one? What do you got in your pocket? You got one of these. These things are probably worth, in equivalent dollars, $10,000, $20,000, right? But you can get them you can get them for what, 1,000. But guess what? They keep designing new ones with more power, more capability. So here's your AM radio. It happens to be a computer. You could have gone to the moon 5 times with one of these back in the 1960s. Anyway, the most important thing to note is these are truths of markets that can't be. They are absolute truths that just completely existing. Now, here let's talk about a regulated market. You can run out of a commodity in a regulated market. Regulated market, like for example, the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union controlled food. What did they run out of all the time? Food. If you ever went, and I've been to them. I've been to Soviet, into East Bloc, back where the wall came down. I went to East Germany. I went to the Commissar stores. Okay, let me tell you about a Commissar store. You go into a Commissar store, and it kind of looks a little bit like a U.S. store, a little bit, but they have lines in the Commissar stores in the sections. They got a bad rap for having lines outside of their stores. Well, the rest of the Soviet Union and Soviet Bloc, they had lines outside the stores for bread and food and stuff like that. But the Commissar stores were only for party members. But I got to go into those stores because as a tourist or American, I was a military guy, so I was able to go into East Berlin and go into the Soviet Bloc. They can't stop us. So you're wearing your uniform, you're going into a Commissar store. Well, they don't have any lines outside the Commissar stores. The lines are inside the Commissar stores. So to get into, for example, the electronics section or the clothing section, they got lines, and they only let so many people in. And the workers are all state workers. So how much help you get? Zero. Their purpose isn't to help you anyway. When you buy a product, their job is to move the product around so it looks like there's still more product, because they don't have any product to put it in. All the Americans wanted were the big, fluffy down comforters and all kinds of really cool stuff that they still made there by hand. The down comforters would cost $7 in the Commissar stores. $7. You know how much a down comforter costs in Germany at the time? $300. $300. So you get a down comforter handmade in East Germany. I always felt bad about buying it because it meant some kid in East Germany was freezing to death for the winter. Of course, they couldn't afford $7. They couldn't afford any of that stuff. Only the party members could afford it. But that's the way it works in a system that controls it. By the way, who owns the water? Who controls the water in Wichita, Kansas? Yeah, the city of Wichita. Wow, we're rationing water. Now, if we had a free market, would we ration water? No, we wouldn't. Innovation says, well, first of all, the rule of availability says as availability goes up, goes down, the price goes up, therefore people use less water. If the price goes up, the availability goes, or the price goes down, the availability goes up. Or that's it backwards. Anyway, okay, you gotta think about this stuff. Anyway, the most important point is this. Who in their right mind would let the government control a commodity that's necessary for life? If you want rationed food, let the government control your food market. And by the way, they do to a large degree. Do you know how they control it in a fascist economy? How they control your food market? Labeling. You got to have all this stuff on the labels. Did you know that by the way, the last Kroger, big Kroger, Kroger is gone. It's going out of business. All the Walgreens, there's like almost 2,000 Walgreens going out of business. Why would that be? What is perturbing the market? The government. U.S. government is perturbing the market. Why do your pharmaceuticals cost so much and so little? Government perturbs the market. These are market truths, market facts. Let me see. Down here we talk about if a commodity is overpriced to the market. So if you're gouging, price gouging, what happens? It won't sell. So, you know, this whole thing about, for example, colluding of companies colluding, I'll just quickly mention this. There are 3 types of monopolies. This is from Milton Friedman. 3 types of monopolies. There are natural monopolies. Standard Oil had a natural monopoly. In other words, they bought out most of the fossil fuel producers in America and had a monopoly. They were broken up, by the way. When they were broken up, did the price go up or down? The price went up. Natural monopolies tend to create more innovation. And by the way, in natural monopolies, you tend to see the prices go down or stabilize really well. One natural monopoly is Microsoft. Are you paying? Does anybody remember how much a Microsoft software, the MS software for your computers cost originally? What's that? It was unaffordable. Well, it was like 300 to 500 bucks. And then remember, and by the way, that's prices with inflation, control with inflation. Now what do? They give it away with computers, basically. You know, you want to buy one, you can, but it's free. Wow, why would they do that? Because they want to sell you more computers, and they also want to sell you more of the apps. They call them apps now, they're software. They're all software. But anyway, if it's overpriced by the market, even in a monopoly, if it's overpriced in the market, it won't sell. There's no such thing as price gouging. There is no such thing as price gouging. You know, because let's say in a free market you have like Aldi's and Safeway and Kroger and whatever, different companies. If one of those companies puts their prices high, anybody gonna buy it? No, what do?
Quantity demand for substitute also rises with price. So you go to Aldi's to buy your ingredients, not Trader Joe's.
And that's why you go, instead of going to Whole Paycheck, you go to another store where it's cheaper, right? Because you're a consumer. You're a good consumer. Because are you going to pay premium for the same product? No, that's stupid, right? Are you stupid? No, you're not stupid. You're smarter than the government. Why does the government want to say there's gouging? What's the big deal about government and gouging? Who causes inflation? The government. Who's causing all these problems in market? Government. What do they got to do? You got to hide it. You got to blame it on somebody else. So who do you pick? Oh, big business. You know, it cracks me up. Big business cannot take your life, liberty, or property. Big business cannot take your life, liberty, or property. Who can take your life, liberty, and property? Yeah, government can take your life, liberty, and property even when you are doing everything legally. Even when you're doing everything legally. Mr. Trump is a great example. In New York City, they want for totally non-intrusive, non-illegal stuff, they fine him almost $500 million. $500 million. For doing what? Making loans with people. How would you like to have that on your record, right? For your house loan? Somebody comes along and says, hey, you got a special deal on your house loan because you got a point off. I'm going to sue you for the value of your house. Whoa, baby. Of course, if you don't pay your taxes, they take your house anyway.
I was just going to point out the price controls in years controlling the price of diamonds. Diamonds really aren't rare, but the market is so closely controlled, keeps the value of diamonds up.
You know, that's an interesting point. Now, that is kind of a good example. Almost all the countries where diamonds come from are what kind of government? Socialist. Yeah, socialist. Now, the problem that they have is what has become the de rigueur today. Emeralds are a great example. Emeralds, rubies, diamonds. what's the big deal about all those today? They can be made synthetically 10 times better, 100 times better than what you can find in the ground. So what they've done by having controls on the commodity is they have produced innovation. So if you go during Christmas season to Sam's and buy a beautiful emerald, huge, beautiful, real, no kidding emerald, they made it in a lab. Is it as valuable as what comes out of the ground? Oh, baby. It's the same product. It's just 100 times better. So what's happening to the market for real emeralds and real rubies and real diamonds? Depresses the price. And actually, it makes the prices lower because the availability is higher. You may not be able to buy a real one, but if you want a big smacker, baby, can you tell the difference? So you give your girlfriend or wife a big old huge diamond. How's she gonna know it's not dug out of the ground? Oh, it's too perfect. Oh, baby, okay, go ahead, try that. I guarantee she will not be unhappy with you. Just say it. But anyway, here's Wichita's problem right here. Price controls and market controls. We were just talking about it. If you set a price lower than the market, the commodity will be overbought and you'll run out. So who's setting the value of the price of water?
Well, who truly owns the water? Begin.
That's a great question. I would argue, as a private property kind of person who understands what law is supposed to be, that the people who own the water are the people who are sitting on the water. And by the way, we do that in the United States. We call them mineral rights, water rights, etc. And you may or may not own them on your own property. A lot of times you have no idea. In the city, especially, if you own an acre in the city, you may or may not own the rights to the minerals or to the water in that property.
So I would be kind of curious about like an aquifer. I do understand mineral rights, but for instance, the aquifer spans huge, vast areas. So I could pump like crazy and say, yeah, it's my water because I'm pulling it from my land, but really I'm lowering the overall aquifer.
The only the positive and negative of that is this. This is one of the great fallacies about water, and it comes from science. This is a segue, but I guess it's important to point this out. Let's say that I have a farm, and I pull the water up from the ground onto my farm, and I irrigate. What happens to the water?
It goes back to the ground or evaporates.
Some evaporates, but it's not a great amount that evaporates. I mean, evaporation, I always keep a thing of water so when I work on my stamps, so I can use the water. And after about 2 weeks, it's gone, right? It's about that much. So the evaporation is really slow because it takes 2 weeks for that maybe an inch of water in a small container to go away completely. So the evaporation isn't high. Plants use some of it, but a lot of it goes back into the ground. Oh, wait, it goes back into the ground? And there's a thing called the water cycle. Ever heard of the water cycle? In the water cycle, water evaporates into the atmosphere. It forms clouds. It forms water. By the way, half the atmosphere is water vapor. And so it comes out of the clouds. Wow. That's interesting. So in reality, even though they tell you that all this water it's the Wichita problem. What have they complained about Wichita not doing that they believe everyone in the business thinks they should be doing? Recycling the water. In other words, in the old days, what we did is we would take the water and put it in the holding tanks, with all the sludge and junk in it. That's what almost every farm in Kansas did because they couldn't perk the water. The water didn't perk, so you can't do septic beds. Septic beds don't work, so you have to have out about a large open pool, septic pool, lagoon, a lagoon or a septic pool. The thing is that that's what they used to do for cities. They don't do that anymore. The government doesn't let them do that anymore. So all that water that used to be put in a septic pool, it would go back through the aquifer. Or today, what they want them to do is clean it and recycle it, which is also a great idea. You say, well, why don't we do that? Well, we already way overspent the government-controlled facility, and there's no market. What is going to happen when there's no market and the government controls? Maybe it's like the Soviet Union. You're living in the Soviet state when the government has socialistic control of water and of energy. Who controls the energy? Evergy, right? Or whatever. The company used to be Westar. I don't know what it's called anymore. But who that is a privately owned monopoly. I was telling you, there's 3 types of monopolies. There is a standard monopoly. There is a privately owned, government-allowed monopoly. And there is a government-owned monopoly. For water, we have a government-owned monopoly. That's why we're rationing water today. If we had a private market where there were many other water suppliers, guess what we would not have? We would have no rationing. Every now and then, we don't get rationing of the electricity, but it is who sets the price of the electricity?
Kansas Corporation.
Yeah, the government in Kansas sets the price. Who sets the regulations? Same dudes. Did you know the reason you're paying? By the way, there was a huge article in the Wall Street Journal about why energy prices are the lowest in Florida of any state in America. You know why? They did not go green. They have almost zero solar and zero wind. They're dependent on natural gas. So the cost of their energy is way low. But the cost of energy in every other state, especially Texas and Kansas, because Kansas has got all these wind energy, and I can show you with the scientific method and history why they don't work. They will never work. Because when wind don't blow, are you charging your phone? How about solar? When the sun don't shine because it's night, are you making any electricity? And by the way, all those solar panels, it takes more energy to make a solar panel than you'll ever get out of the solar panel. Now, I know I'm going to segue into other ideas, but this is all about market and regulation, because markets are self-regulatory. They self-regulate. So when the government comes in and says, we're going to regulate you, like for example, great example, the government says, you can't have any salmonella in your peanut butter. Well, yeah, duh. So what happens if salmonella accidentally gets into the peanut butter? What's that? Yeah, it's called tort. Remember, I told you before, in the Constitution, there are 2 types of law, criminal and tort. So if you accidentally make some peanut butter with salmonella, you'll be sued. That's reasonable. Now, if you intentionally put salmonella in your peanut butter, that is criminal. So you will go to jail and you'll have to pay the piper. You have to pay the business. You have to pay for it, right? What does the government do? They come down with a regulation and say, you can't put salmonella in your peanut butter. Is that going to ever prevent peanut butter? What happens? They come in and they say you can't have bad meat, right? So they send in the inspectors. So you have a whole government agency whose job is to check food quality. And they come in and they make sure that the food quality is good. And they check the cows. And who pays for that, by the way? You pay for it, yeah. You pay for it in your taxes, you pay for it in the food costs, you pay for it in everything. It's not in the Constitution. It's not allowed. Why government, by the way, if you want to go out and shoot your dinner, what do you got to have? Wait, nobody required a license for 200 years of American history to go and shoot their own dinner on their own property, or anywhere else for that matter. But you need a license? I think you need a license to farm most places, don't you?
And you just don't necessarily, unless you're gonna hunt a certain type of animal, you gotta be picked in the lottery.
In some places, yeah.
Yeah, you can't just go shoot something.
And yet, what do you find dead? 20,000 a year on Kansas highways. Deer hit by cars. I don't know. I'm just saying, okay? Look, the government, why does the government want to control markets? Why does the government want to control markets?
Because we've got to protect our phony baloney jobs.
Well, I'd put even worse than that, because they want to control you. The reason they control markets is they want to control you. The food marketplace, right? They want to big time control the food marketplace. Why? Because y'all are eating too many calories. The government wants to limit you from eating the calories you want to eat. You ever notice that? You ever notice that? Matter of fact, in New York City, what did they say? Old Adams, those boys, they put in this thing and said you can't have big gulps. You can't have big sodas. The sodas are limited, right? And you think that the reason they want to get rid of the plastic straws is to save the world? No. If you have a paper straw, you can't drink half a drink before it turns into mush. You can't finish your drink. You know, they would like to limit and restrict everything because that's how you control it. The government controls, look, you can prove this, just do your own research. The more the government gets involved with healthcare, the higher the price of healthcare. And by the way, back in the old days, what did your doctor used to do? Home visits, right? Boy, you're going to have a rare time to find a doctor do a home visit. By the way, America, and I'm going to throw this out. In America, we have the best effectivity and the best availability of healthcare in the world. We always come really low on healthcare, not for availability and effectivity, but for cost. We have some of the highest healthcare costs if you're just measuring by, you know, if you go to a hospital and say, how much does it cost to do this? You'll find that the healthcare costs are higher than the rest of the world. But yet, we have the highest effectivity. In other words, if you go in and you have a cancer or whatever, we have a much higher survival rate and effectivity rate. And if you want to get care, if you go to any emergency room in this city, you're going to see a doctor within 20 minutes or less, depending on how they triage. If you go to Canada, you might be lucky to see a doctor in 6 months. By then you're dead. So, you know, the problem is you want effectivity and you want availability. Because you don't want to wait till you're dead to get your health care. Just saying, you know. And by the way, no health care is worth it if it's death care. Where, by the way, and I'll mention this, T-Hart, this is what Todd T-Hart told me. Todd T-Hart said they were looking at the cost of American health care with the Congress and Senate, and they asked the CBO, the Federal Budget Office, to give them the figures and tell them, why is health care so inexpensive in Europe compared to the United States? And the answer is because they ration and limit by age. So if you reach 62 in the UK, United Kingdom, you get red pill or blue pill. In other words, you can off yourself red pill, or they'll give you the blue pill so you feel good while you're dying. They stop care. In America, if you want a knee replacement, they're idiots, but they'll give you a knee replacement a month before you're going to die. You know, they'll give it to you, and you may never walk again, but you got your knee replacement and your cataracts, and I know this because I've had to see this in my family and families, where the doctors will sell you a product and you go, well, that was $100,000, thing that the taxpayer paid for, and you died like a month later or 6 months later, and you never walked. But you know what? At least you can get it here. Now, I'd rather you pay for it, but we'll get to that. That's another problem. Anyway, like I said, when you start having rationing or shortage problems, you know immediately that is a problem of, for example, Cabbage Patch dolls, right? Even when there was a shortage of Cabbage Patch dolls, could you get one?
You just had to pay for it.
You just had to pay for it. Oh my goodness gracious. God forbid you have to pay for a product that you want, right? For your little kid screaming, oh, I want one, Daddy, right? I'm just saying, but if you really want it that bad, right? Anyway, in a free market, you can't have any of that stuff. That's why you want it. These were a lot of drawings from last week. We talked about these. I want to move down to the problem of government. Yeah, we talked about this a little bit. We talked about proving these things. We did that. Purpose of government. What I want to do is go down to safety net. Moral hazard and safety net. Here's a question. And this is pretty easy to prove, but I don't know if we have time to totally prove some of these things, but you can prove it to yourself a little bit. Some are self-evident, in my opinion. The question is, who is responsible for finances? Who is responsible for finances? Now, I probably should give you a little bit of history from the historical point. Social Security. Who invented Social Security? Anybody know? Well, in America, FDR implemented, but the guy who invented it was von Bismarck. Von Bismarck was one of the chancellors of Germany during the Imperial Germany, before the Nazis. And he was a socialist and a really wise dude, because he wanted to prevent the German people from revolting. They were having serious problems because of the wars they'd come out of and the wars they expected to go into, because the next war they came into was World War I, and they had serious problems with their population and the people. And so von Bismarck came up with a great idea. What if we tell the people that when you reach 70 years old, 60 years old, we'll take care of you. But what we do is we tax them. We tax them, and we tell them we're going to put it into we're going to force your employer to pay this tax, and this tax is going to go into your lockbox, into your 401k, we call it today, but into your retirement funds. And then when you reach a certain age, the government will take care of you. Now, everybody thinks, oh, wow, what a cool idea. The government's going to take care of my money and my employer's going to pay for it. Well, who really paid for it? You paid for it, because the employer just cut, if the employer has to pay 10%, they just cut your pay by 10%. That's the way it works, just so you know. So that's what the German government did. Now, if you read Otto von Bismarck's whole thing, Otto said, we're going to do this because it prevents the old people from rebelling. Why? Because they're on the government dole. You're paying in for your whole life for years, 60 years or so, and then you get your free money. But you just get your money that you put into the government. Oh, that's special. And if you're a young person, what's the expectation? If I toe the line and don't cause any problems, then I'm going to have my money, right? When I get to be 60. So the government's going to take care of me. Oh, that's special. The problem we got is a thing called moral hazard. Moral hazard. So what happens with moral hazard? If the government says, I'm going to do your savings program for you, what does the individual say?
I'm going to spend the rest of it.
Yeah, I don't need to save. I don't need to save. I don't need to save any money. In Germany, if you're in Germany You can be atheist, Lutheran, or Catholic. If you say that you're a Lutheran or Catholic, what happens automatically?
You take your tax and they give it to the church.
They take your tithe. They automatically take 10% of your money and give it to the church. It's government control. And if you're atheist, they don't. So you wonder why there's so many atheists in Germany? Oh, baby, I'd be atheist for that, right? They don't get my money. But it's enforced tithing. Isn't that cool? It's just like enforced Social Security. And in the United States, you know, if you could take the 14%, you know, it's supposed to be you give 7% and the employer gives 7%, but really you're giving it all. If you could take that 14% from your whole life and take and invest it the way you want, you'd be a millionaire, baby. You'd be a more than millionaire. You might even be a twin millionaire, double millionaire. But because the government does it, and it's a great program for the government, because you give them the money, and if you die early, they keep it. If they give you the money, or you give them the money, and if you die late, like they love for you to die when you're 60 or whatever, when 65, whatever, you can start taking the bucks. Because if you die, oh baby, we got the money. We got the money, and you paid for it your whole life. And guess what? Does it go to your heirs? Now, I seem to remember Ecclesiastes. We just read Ecclesiastes about not being able to leave money for your child, for your son, for your children. That sounds to me to be anti-God and anti-Christian. But we don't talk much about that, right? About the government being anti-God and anti-Christian, even though there is anti-God and anti-Christian as you can be about a lot of stuff. Just having a fascist government, to me, says we are way beyond the pale. Because when the government tells you the toilet paper you can use and how much water you can flush in the toilets. And by the way, anybody been to the Rayburn building? You know what the Rayburn building is, right? You know where all the congressmen and senators live or work, their offices? You think there's any water-controlled toilets in those buildings? No way. I've been in there, man. They got gold fixtures, and they're a full flush. And I can tell you the reason, as an engineer, why you got to have a full flush. It's 2 gallons plus. There's a reason.
That's not good.
Anyway, the government and moral hazard. Okay, moral hazard is really important.
That's another reason to control calories.
It's true. Anyway, there, moral hazard. Okay, you can look at this example of dolphins. What do the signs say about dolphins all over Florida? Don't feed the dolphins. What about the bears in Yosemite? Don't feed the bears. What happens if you feed the bears to the dolphins? They become dependent because you took away their moral hazard. The moral hazard for a bear or a dolphin is they have to work to get their supper. But if you start giving them the supper, they're going to stop foraging for their supper, and they'll start looking for you. And they might take your hand, your face, your kid, whatever, for their supper. The point is that the real big problem with moral hazard is without moral hazard, people are not willing to take risks they would not otherwise consider. And a safety net reduces or eliminates moral hazard. Everybody says, oh, we got to have a safety net. We got to feed people that are hungry. Okay. Look, anybody seen a homeless in America? What's the problem with homeless in America?
They're waiting around for their handout.
They're well-fed, waiting around for their handout, and most of them, by the way, which I just did a thing, they die from drugs. How can they afford drugs? We give them $30,000 in government funds, and then Catholic Charities feeds them, and we feed them, but yet they got money to spend on drugs and alcohol? Why does that work? You know, we give them those cards, the SNAP cards. The state tried to limit the amount of money that you get off SNAP cards to $100 a day. And we were sued by the Obama administration, and they said, no, you can't restrict that. Now, most of the time, you can only get about $300 a day. Did you know that you can get every penny off a SNAP card in cash? You have really nice nails and really nice tennis shoes and really nice clothes and a phone
Cable.
and cable.
Good cable.
And, you know, you get your pornography at the library, so it's okay. But the big deal is that because we are feeding them, what are you going to have more of? Now, why would you do that? You take away moral hazard, and you say, well, if I take away moral hazard, then the people are going to work. Well, some people, I believe in the Pareto principle. Pareto principle is great. So 20% of people in an emergency might react positively. 80% are going to die because they have no clue what they're doing and they need somebody to lead them. They teach us this at the FAA. The FAA, when they talk about accidents and, in airplanes and stuff like that, Pareto principle. There's only 20% who will know what to do and will do anything about it. The rest will just burn to death right there in their seats. Somebody has to help them. And if the stewardess and the pilots are done, unless there's a top 20% that's going to help, they're dead. Now, you might find 20% who homeless. No, you won't. You might find 20% of the people that are destitute. America, I have never seen a person who asked me a handout who was legit. I worked a lot in churches. I've worked a lot in urban churches. And I tell you what, even the people I had the greatest hope for were playing the game. They were going to other churches to get money. I remember one young man that we were trying to help. We were paying part of his bill. In most churches, you help, you prevent moral hazard because they come and they say, I have a bill. You say, okay, let us help you with your finances. Let us help you get more work. Let us help you do whatever we can. We'll pay, maybe half of your bill, but we expect you to get the other half. So go work on it, right? Well, this kid, we thought he was doing really well. I got a call from another pastor. The pastor said, I wanted to report one of the guys that we know you're working with. He asked us for money.
The other half.
Well, actually more than the other half, but that's what happens. We had some friends that we believe were having problems. They wanted us to help them. They wanted me to help them with their IRS, with their taxes. Pastor said, you got to watch out because they look sweet, they look kind, they're an elderly couple, but they're always hawking for bucks. And they were. So, thanks for the warning, but this is a problem of taking away moral hazard. Once you start feeding the dolphins are going to come back for more. And I guess I should mention this. There's a book called The Tragedy of American Compassion. When Newt Gingrich was the head of the House, got a copy and gave it to every single person in the House and Senate. And he said, read this book. It's an amazing book. It's about American charity. And what happens when the churches used to control all the charity in America. It was wonderful by this book. It's great data, great information. You know what? The picture they try to build in your mind is what was happening back when the churches took care of charity in America. It was terrible. People were starving. People were freezing to death. That is absolutely, completely untrue. That is an absolute falsehood. The thing is that when the churches controlled it, if you came to a church and said, here's my wife, here's my kids, we're hungry, we need a place to stay, we need food, what they would do is they would take them in and they would say, okay, see the wood pile? Split the wood. Because in that time, everything was wood, you had to split the wood. To the women, they'd say, okay, get your sewing, get your needle, get your sewing, we need you to sew. And so the women would sew, the men would do the thing, there were people taking care of the kids, and if you did your work, they would feed you. Paul says, you don't work, you don't eat. Sounds reasonable to me. Guess what? In the book, they talk about it. There were a lot of times where people would come in, they'd say, we need you to cut the wood. And what would the guy say? Nope. They would, I myself would work with the church. We had a lady who's, we had a food pantry. She said, I'm hungry, I need food. We said, great. Said, well, if you clean up this part of the church, of course you got to supervise the kind of thing, but if you clean up this part of the church, we'll feed you. She's gone. She's gone in a heartbeat. She says, if I go over here to the charities, the government will give it to me for free. Why would I work for food? Moral hazard. No moral hazard, and your society is dead. Basically, without moral hazard, the big problem of moral hazard, you say, okay, we have a safety net. But the big problem with the safety net, what's the biggest problem with the safety net? Can you figure it out? What's the biggest problem with the safety net?
Talking about de-incentivizing?
Yeah. What does it de-incentivize? Production of work. This guy.
$1 trillion banknotes.
What's that?
$1 trillion banknotes.
$1 trillion banknotes. Yeah, they're not printing them yet that way, but they're going to have to, right? The big deal is that person that is in the homeless community, that is on drugs and alcohol, that person without the government involvement, without the safety nets of the government, that person might have a job, might be producing, might be a productive member of society. And a productive member of society is what? A consumer, a taxpayer, not a looter. If they're a looter, you're crushing your society. The point is to make these people, the greatest compassion is to what? Make them be hungry. Make them want to work because they're starving to death. Well, we as Christians want to help the destitute. What? People who can't help themselves. People who are orphans. People who are in a condition that they can't take care of themselves. And there are a lot of those people. That is compassion. Why does the government get involved with this? Why does the government get involved with the safety net and all these things?
Good intentions.
Well, they want to control you. It's not good intentions. If they had good intentions, they wouldn't do any of this. It's not good intentions at all. It is not good intentions. They want to control you. And if I can take your tax dollars, if I can take your money and give it to somebody who is not producing, not a taxpayer, not producing, not doing anything, it's destroying society. It is ruining society. As I said,
They'll give you your vote.
What's that?
They'll give you their vote.
Oh yeah.
But people at work, it just disincentivize them as well, because I'm working and I have to give my money for it.
Exactly. It is a huge disincentive, and the best example is Social Security. The best example of disincentivization is Social Security, because if you think about it, the government is taking 14% of your earnings, and if you were free to take that money and put it where you wanted to, you would do what? Invest in yourself, invest in corporations, invest in bonds, annuities, invest. You would take that money and invest it in other companies in America. But what are you investing the money in?
Even if you didn't do investing, you would be consuming, and therefore it is money still coming back into the economy in some form. Not everybody is a good investor, per se.
I don't disagree with that. However, the 401k system forces you to invest your money even though it's not government. And the 401 system is probably the best ever because, and I'm not into regulation at all, I'd rather just be free and easy. You do what you want with your own money. But the 401k is a wonderful idea until the government does what? Comes for it. And if you don't think they're coming for it, they tried to come for that money multiple times in the previous administrations. I'm surprised in this administration they have not come big time for your 401, but they're too busy giving your money away for student loans. You know, the student loan debacle is astounding to me. So you're paying for other people's bad decisions. And that's the problem with moral hazard. I don't know if I've got it written down here, but the real problem with, yeah, right here. A safety net reduces or eliminates moral hazard. Any government safety net puts citizens at risk because it makes them responsible for the bad decisions of other citizens. And the big deal is governments can compel by force. They put a gun to your head to take anything from you. You know, if you don't pay your taxes, what's going to happen to you? They're going to force you to pay your taxes. In fact, there's a special IRS tax court. You know that? There's special tax courts. Maybe the Supremes will get us free of that and actually make them go back to real courts. But you know why there are no real courts for IRS regulations?
Because it's unsupportable by law.
Because it's not in the criminal statutes. The criminal statutes have nothing to do with not paying your taxes. That's why you get the wackadoos. There's a lot of wackadoos out there who say, you know, the government does not require you to pay your taxes, which, by the way, is really true. You're not required by law to pay your taxes. You're required by law to file. Then the government determines what your tax really is, right? That's happened to you, right? You get a letter from the IRS and say, hey, you owe some more bucks. Give us some more bucks, or what? They don't put the threat in the bottom. Some lady, some sweet old lady put on it, she signed her check and said, under duress, something like that, under duress. And the IRS actually sued her. And it went all the way to Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said that is First Amendment right to be able to put in duress. But just so you know, your government thinks that if you put something negative on the check you give to the IRS, they could actually take you to court and try to fine you for that. So I know this is kind of ugly. You know, this whole thing is ugly. But going back to these ideas about capitalism and the reality of the rules of capitalism and the moral hazard, I think is really important. Now, just cogitate on these and think about them. We're going to move to a little bit different ideas next. But all of this is important to continue to realize what can be proven as true and what is truth. And it may, like I said, it may be different than you're used to. Maybe everything you know, you may be rehearing all the stuff you already know. But that's okay. Thank you, Father, for your word. We pray you look after us this week. In your name we pray.
Yeah.